Me today. I know it's early in the morning and many of you are doing work life and school balance and family balance, so I appreciate you being here. Today is very auspicious. We have full moon in Leo, and of course the topic of discussion is very appropriate. We're going to be talking about the stars and the light and constellations. So before we start, I'd like to start off with a prayer and an invocation to have the blessings of all the deities and all the gods. So please take a deep breath and center yourself. Gajananam bhutaganadisevitam kapittajambhufalasarabhakshitam Umasutam shokavinashakaranam namami Vigneshwarapadapangajam. Om Shadananam Kunkumaraktavarnam Mahamatim Divyamayuravahanam Rudrasya Sunam Surasanyanatham Goham Sadaham Sharanyam Prapadye. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananashjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Ananda Sansara Samudra Aukayitabhyam Guru Bhaktidabhyam Vairagya Samrajyat Pujanabhyam Namo Namah Shri Guru Padukabhyam. Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada. Om Namo Bhagavate Dhanvantaraye Amrita Kalasha Hastaya Sarvamaya Vinashanaya Trilokyanathaya Shri Mahavishnave Swaha. Thank you for joining me today. Today is the first part of the lecture into the introduction to Jyotish, or the science of light, or Vedic astrology as it's now commonly known as. My name is Gayatri Shailesh. I'm a student wrapping up Block 2 and in Block 3. Thank you to Monica Ji and Atul Ji for providing this amazing forum for learning and advancing myself and all of our knowledge. So to begin with, I'm sure many of you are intrigued. Many of you may not know anything about astrology. Many of you may know it just as much as what's my sign. Some of you may just read some astrological articles in the newspaper or magazines. So I'm not sure where everybody is at. So apologies for making any assumptions, but I'm going to start at the very basics. Just to start off with, the planets will have an effect on you whether you believe in them or not. And this is a quote by Sri Sri Swami Yukteswar Giri. He was an amazing, amazing astrologer, just really connected to the wisdom of the ancient rishis. And for those of you who've read the autobiography of a yogi, you may be familiar with him. I've actually been to his ashram in the Himalayas, as well as his guru's ashram as well. And then, of course, Paramahamsa Yogananda, his disciple, quotes, "A child is born on that day and that hour when the celestial rays are in mathematical harmony with his individual karma. His horoscope is a portrait revealing his unalterable past and its future results." It's pretty profoundly said, I think. So today what we're going to cover is just an overview. There's a lot of information here, so I hope you will just listen without, just absorb it, and you may absolutely put your questions on the forum or email me or whatever the case may be. Happy to answer as much as possible. So I'm going to have to feed you this information in bits because it's a very complex science. It's not to be minimized. This is the wisdom from the ancient sages that have come through time. And so I am but a humble servant. I know about, I would say, 1% of this amazing wisdom. And I've been studying this for over, I would say about 15 years now. And I still feel like I have barely cracked the surface of it. And I've been blessed by many teachers and mentors and a lineage of my mentor that is a family of astrologers in Kerala from South India. And so Kerala is known to have some amazing Jyotish astrologers. So we'll get into the history and lineage and all of that very carefully, and hopefully you'll all enjoy this. So just an overview. Jyotisha or Jyotish, Jyoti means light. And so the wisdom of light is what this is. And it's, to sum it up, it's basically the traditional system of astronomy and astrology. And it is considered one of the 6 limbs of the Vedas, or a Vedanga. It's considered one of the most supreme limbs of the Vedas, as it gives insight into a person's life and death even. So its history goes back older than what has been currently indicated in many of the forums as about 3100 BC. It's an absolutely spiritual science. It allows us to live a Vedic way of life. And one of the earliest and codified texts, it's referred to as a Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. And I'll talk more about who Sage Parashara was. And then the other known text is the Jaimini Sutras. Unfortunately, and I'll again tell you about Jaimini, but only 4 chapters of that text remain. And then there are other subsidiary and ancillary texts, which I'm not going to state. But for the purposes of our studies, I will be referring to the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. That is considered the official codified work. And of course, there are many divisions in Jyotish. But primarily Surya Siddhanta, which is another arm of Jyotish or another approach to Jyotish, and then Hora and Samhita. And basically, Hora just means to calculate or to deduct, and then Samhita is just like a treatise, essentially. So in Hora, which is what we are mostly dealing with, it includes one's natal astrology, which is referred to as Jatak or even Janma Rashi. And it also indicates the longevity, which is Ayu, amongst many other things in it, right? And we all know as students of Ayurveda that Ayu deals with life and Ayurveda deals with the science of life. So I hope you can start to see the correlations between Ayurveda and Jyotish already. And as you may have inferred already, Jyotish or the science of life here essentially deals with karma as its main theme. And I use the word karma not in the way as it's understood in the Western culture, unfortunately, where it's minimized a lot or is used very flippantly, I find. Most people don't even know the real meaning of karma. And it's just to kind of quote something here, karma phala vipaka kala vidhanam. The effect of karma is based on time as past actions come about in its effects. And Jyotish as a science basically shows the rules for these times. So we can talk about the laws of cause and effect, but it's causation and effect. And it kind of manifests itself into the human experience as highs and lows. And just as a basic principle, right, in your study of philosophy that underlies Ayurveda, we know that consciousness is dynamic and restless. When we talk about Purusha and Prakriti, that's what we talk about. And consciousness is always in action and interaction just to exist and recognize itself. So from an inert state of tamas, action comes about into rajas and into sattva. So the soul stirs, and this initiates the seed of karma or action by itself. And the seed is sown for a future effect. It could be a sweet fruit like an apple, or it could be a poisonous berry. And it all depends on the intention and the attention paid to the presence, if you will, paid at the time when the seed was sown. So the reason we don't recognize the reasons, the cause of certain karmas is because our minds in our very limited way as human beings are so focused on the story. Oh, this happened to me. Why did this happen to me? Oh, I was traumatized, or my dad and mom were not very nurturing or nourishing, or they were cruel, or this person did this to me, or blah, blah, blah. So we get caught up in the stories. And so we forget the cause that brought about the effect. We forget the reasons why the outcome came about. And sometimes not all the actions that bear fruit in one lifetime can actually come about in the same lifetime where the seed was sown. And while some of the outcomes are instantaneous, others go beyond single and multiple lifetimes. So just to get into the history of Jyotish, the lineage, and hopefully many of you as Ayurvedic students are starting to read some of the stories of the Puranas, namely the Vishnu Purana, and so on. But they're amazing stories, and the Vedas and the Puranas always have indicated these stories for our limited comprehension to kind of grasp some of the more deeper and profound meanings of the cosmology and you know, how karma comes about. So to start off with, Sage Vashishta was a Brahma Rishi. He was actually a guru to King Dasharatha of the Ramayana, and he is somebody who is said to have conquered anger. So after many, many thousands of years of penance, there was a Rakshasa or a demon who came about and killed all his 100 sons. And in his grief, he knew he could not retaliate in anger, so he, out of his deep grief, he tried to commit suicide and failed. And when he came back, he found out that his oldest son, Shakti's wife, Adrashanti, was pregnant with a child, and he heard this chanting of the Vedas coming about, and he was like, well, what is this? And he finally realized it was coming from the womb of the child that she was carrying. And that child is Parashara. And Parashara is considered a great rishi, a great sage. And there's a story about how when he was crossing a river on a ferry, he was an astronomer, he was an astrologer of, you know, amazing, beyond our finite comprehension. So as he was crossing the ferry, there's a story that he calculated that it came to him that a great person was about to be born. And so he literally asked the girl who was a ferry, the person who was kind of rowing the ferry across the bank, that if he could mate with her, because he knew that this child had to be born in that instant. And she was a fisherwoman, and, you know, you should read the story. It's all available online if you ever want to look it up. But the child born of her was Sage Vyasa, and many of you know that Sage Vyasa was a person who compiled, actually codified and classified the Vedas, and is also the author of the Mahabharata. So therefore, yeah, that's right. She was impregnated through a glance. And so Veda Vyasa, of course, you know, was, the rest is history, as it said. You know, he wrote the story of the Mahabharata, and we know that the Bhagavad Gita, you know, is a section from that story as well. So Parashara was a great Vedic seer, and a seer, a sage, is somebody who could see reality, and I mean absolute reality, with an extraordinary sense of sight, sound, taste, hearing, and touch. And I don't mean just the normal senses. I also mean the subtle senses. And so he is the person who wrote the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, which is a major treatise on Jyotish. And since he's the first one who provided the wisdom and knowledge in written form, because remember, all of the ancient wisdom was always in spoken form, so disciples who learned it from gurus always had to remember it, which was, you know, from memory. And in many times when we celebrate the festival of Guru Purnima, we dedicate this to Parashara and Sage Vyasa, since they were the first ones to sort of codify the wisdom from the ancient times. And here's a quote from the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra: "Only good will follow the teaching of this Vedic science to the students, who are," and he proceeds to tell us about the qualifications, "who are peacefully disposed, who honor the preceptors and elders, who speak only the truth and are God-fearing, Woeful forever, doubtlessly, will it be to impart knowledge of the science to an unwilling student, a heterodox, which is a non-believer, and to a crafty person, or anyone who will use this in a very trivialized way, right? So that right there tells you to start exercising discernment and good judgment before we impart the wisdom to somebody, or even when we speak about Jyotish, because you know how trivial it is. We sometimes start to have these conversations about, oh, what's my sign? What's your sign? Without people really understanding what it really means, right? So therefore, the knowledge that we're about to embark on comes from the most sacred and ancient line of sages, and as such, we must honor and respect this knowledge that we're about to receive. Jaimini is another sage. He was a disciple of Parashara. He was a Mimamsa philosopher from Nepal. He was an amazing, amazing, very intelligent mathematician, astronomer, all of that. And he actually wrote the Jaimini Sutras. It's all about predictive astrology. And it deals with the ability to look at a person, and it deals with being able to predict in the moment, where the tendencies of the person will take somebody in their life path and so on. Unfortunately, only 4 chapters of his work prevail. A lot of it was lost, due to, there was a time in the land of Bharat, which is, only part of it is now India, where a lot of pillaging and destruction occurred. So we've lost a lot of valuable treatises, just like China. There were amazing Taoist texts and similar sciences that were all destroyed when war and pillaging occurs. Okay, so astrology does not happen without astronomy. So just to set the background a little briefly, many of you may know this, so I'm just going to take a very fundamental approach here. Okay, so what I've shown here in this diagram is sort of, and I don't know how well you can actually see this, but there's the Earth sort of, revolving around the sun, right? And then there's all the star systems around as well. Now, even though the Earth is revolving around the sun, because we're geocentric, we're standing on the Earth, we see the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, right? So according to us, we see the sun following an ecliptic. So that ecliptic is that very large red circle, or the orbit that you're seeing around in that diagram. And so from our perspective on Earth, that circle is divided into 12 divisions of the longitude of 30 degrees each, and that's what we refer to as a sign or a rashi in Sanskrit, and I'll get more into that as we go on. Okay, and it's these sort of, the traversing around the ecliptic is what gives us the divisions of time. We use that, and again, time is a very, very important concept in Jyotish, and I'll get into it into a later class, but we use that as a measure for noticing the apparent movement of the sun along its ecliptic, right, or as planets traverse through the zodiac. Now, there's 2 types of zodiac, and many of you may be more familiar with Western astrology. Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac, or the Shayana, or the turning, and it's based on the seasonal shifts. So the sign of Aries literally begins at the moment of the vernal equinox, somewhere around mid-March or so, right? And I've had this table up on the side, and you can see the dates stay fixed on the tropical date column, as you can see, and that's when we know that spring officially begins, right? And you can also see that it's focused on the sun and the movement of the Earth around the sun. In Vedic astrology, however, we use a sidereal zodiac, or Narayana. In many cases, what that means is it's based on the movement of the sun and the constellations of the fixed stars. And I say the word fixed stars because those stars really aren't fixed, right? In many thousands of years, those constellations are moving like 1 degree. It's so minuscule that we are not able to really perceive it from Earth, in any great form. So we tend to refer to them as fixed stars, but technically speaking, they're not fixed. So I hope that makes sense. So in the sidereal date, what we look at is when the sun has come into Aries, and you'll see the constellation of Aries, a constellation of Taurus, a constellation of Gemini, Cancer, etc. They stay pretty fixed in the sky, and the sun is sort of traversing through them. Okay, and then going on, here's another quote from the Brihadarashara Hora. Lord Vishnu is the form of the grahas. The unborn Lord has many incarnations. He has incarnated as the Nayan, or the Nava, which is a Sanskrit word for 9, grahas, to bestow upon the living beings the results due to their karmas. He is Janardana. He assumed the auspicious form of the grahas to destroy the demons, evil forces, and sustain the divine beings. Now notice that demons and the divinity are not outside of us. They're all within us. From Surya, the incarnation of Ram, from Chandra, that of Krishna, from Mangal, that of Narasimha, from Buddha, that of Buddha, from Guru, that of Vaman, from Shukra, that of Parashuram, from Shani, that of Kurma, from Rahu, that of Varaha, and from Ketu, that of Meena has occurred. And for those of you who may not be familiar with these terms, please read any of the Vishnu Puranas that tell you about the incarnations and the stories of the incarnations of Mahavishnu or Lord Vishnu. And this will start to make sense to you. And again, these stories are meant to imply the journey of consciousness through the human realm. Okay, so philosophy. Now we're going to get into, allow me to take you into a journey of this, right, a little bit deeper. Now it's really easy to say, well, the planets are sitting up in the sky. How in the heck do they have an effect on me? Well, they do, but we may not be able to really understand it in our finite understanding, right? Now we know from Sankhya philosophy, and we know from studying the Vedic sciences that really we as human beings, we are a representation of the macrocosm. So from the macrocosm to the microcosm. So the soul, as we know, is traversing through time and space in our finite understanding, because really time and space are just concepts that we exist in. And we're impelled by the force of the karmas that have been generated. So why are we here, right, on the planet? So we know that human life is about pursuing the 4 purusharthas, or the meaning of life, or the goals of life, which is dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And all of you should really know these concepts at a fundamental state, because these are also the 4 goals of life that and that requires good health. That is what the science of Ayurveda is about, to help us live life, to pursue these 4 goals. So in our pursuit of these 4 goals, what is actually alive in you, and what is from above? Now, we could take the one view, well, if our fate and destiny is already written, then we really have no control or free will, right? So we could just say that some master puppeteer is sitting about and kind of stringing us along. We really have no control. And then the more rational of us may think, well, what do you mean somebody's controlling me? I am doing, I am in control, I am thinking, I am speaking, whatever. So that's the complete opposite of that I am, completely separate and individuated from the Supreme Self, right? And again, forgive me that I'm going into a little bit of a philosophy here, you know, but I hope you're getting the essence of what I'm trying to say. Or do we adopt a mix of both, right? Is there a little bit of, well, fate and destiny has been written. In Arabic, there's a beautiful word, actually, that conveys this, maktub. And Dilek, you may be familiar with that word, but it's a very sacred word. It means it is already written. And the ancient philosophers of all cultures, of all ancient cultures, actually knew and understood that things were already written, and we as human beings had to experience it with full presence. And our goal is to really transcend the ego. The whole human experience is really, if you think about it, we've been in the womb for 9 to 10 months, and we have no consciousness of who we are. And from the moment we're born, we're completely dependent upon a mother and father who nurtures and nourishes us. And somewhere around, you know, around as the mind and brain develops and the consciousness develops, there comes a separation, a sense of separation. Oh, I exist separate from my mother and separate from my father. So we start to get into that individuation process, right? The I, me, mine. And then our whole life is about living the I, me, mine theory. And somewhere through our life experiences, the goal is to get to moksha, which is to deliver us from the attachment to I, me, mine, and say it's all about thy, thee, thou, and so on. It's nothing about you, right? So if you want to think about karma, you can think about it as this permanent groove in your mind that you're just rotating around. It's always your innate tendencies, your inherent tendencies. And so when we start to look at the planets, we can say how present are we being to the truth of that planet within us, right? This is the free will that we get to experience. How do you feel and experience the truth in your life? What is it that you're choosing to see and not see in your life? And so you can say, oh, I'm going through the influence of Mars, and this is why I'm angry and irritated and frustrated and blah, blah, blah. We can make that kind of excuse. Or you can say, I am choosing to enter this moment with a presence, to invoke the highest quality of Mars, which is discipline, which is commitment, which is trying to see what is dharmically right from wrong. Or you can choose to fall and give in to the lowest quality of the planet. And that is that absolute moment of free will that you can experience for yourself in every moment. Now, our normal human life landscape is about 120 years, roughly thereabout. Of course, as Kali Yuga progresses, that number of years reduces down drastically because of the way of life that many people are living and lifestyles that we're leading. But it kind of sets up a backdrop, if you will. It sets a context and weaves a story of layers of factors that we create in this lifetime or other lifetimes that come into health as well, right? Like when we look at our clients and when we look at our patients, we know when we look at their hetus, how that illness has come about. That's what Nidana and Samprapti is about, right? About assessing how a disease has progressed. It's the same thing with life. So what is in store for your soul to complete its course in this physical costume, in this physical body, right? Our physical and mental and emotional suffering is really inevitable due to our attachments and our illusions. And it's all sort of stored in our subconscious, which is represented by the moon. And your relationship with each of the planets are reflected in your body-mind. And there's a graphic here that is from the Maharishi School by Dr. Tony Nader. And it literally shows a representation of the planets within the structures of the brain. And it's absolutely fascinating when you think about it and how each part of the brain actually functions and shows the features of each of the planets as well. Now, in Jyotish, we say the sun is the Paramatman, or the Supreme Soul. It is the message of the Supreme Soul. And the moon is the Jiva Atman, the individual soul that we embody. And it's through the moon, and we know that the moon also represents manas, the emotional mind, the sensory mind, through which we're experiencing the world through these senses, through the five senses and the organs of action and so on. And that's how we're experiencing reality and its lessons. And you can already see that our experience of reality is very filtered and colored by our beliefs and our attitudes, right? Because most of us are not really even seeing reality as it is, right? And there have been science and studies done on this with eyewitness accounts. Somebody will say, oh, they saw this person who was African-American who stole this, when in fact, when they arrest the person, it's white. Somebody might say, oh, that dress is blue, when it's really white. So it's a really interesting study of how our senses distort our view of reality. Okay, so the zodiac is referred to as a Kala Purusha, and you're a representation of it. And the word Kala Purusha simply means the cosmic man, or the man, and this is a representation of Lord Vishnu, and I'll get into this in a later slide. We are a representation, we're the microcosmic representation of the Kala Purusha. And personal responsibility comes about through your self-awareness of yourself. And hopefully That's what Jyotish can do for you. And healing the mind will heal the body, absolutely. Trying to advance the slide here. Oops, I think I advanced. Did I go too much? No, okay. So getting into some of the Jyotish terminology, you will start to see these words, and I want you to get very comfortable with this. So bhava is, it's roughly translated as house, but it's a really poor translation. Bhava means condition. It's a state of being or the state of mind. And the 12 houses actually show the condition of our mind in our chart. It is the home to all the experiences that you experience through that segment of life. And I'll get into that later. I just want you to start thinking about what the word bhava means. It represents the totality of your external experiences from your internal perspective. And so from an astrological standpoint, houses 1, 5, and 9, which are the fire signs, and again, another lecture is going to get into the houses in greater detail. Houses 1, 5, and 9 are the fire signs. It refers to the dharma, how we show ourselves to the world. Our spirit, our inspiration, creativity, the beginning of I am. Houses 2, 6, and 10 are the earth signs, or artha, which shows us how we go about achieving in the material plane and how we want to be recognized for it in the world. How am I relating in the world, right? Houses 3, 7, and 11 are the air signs, or the houses of kama. Kama means lust or love, but this is how we convey our ideas, needs, and desires through relationships. That I meet you, I meet others. Houses 4, 8, and 12 are the water signs, or the houses of moksha, liberation, releasing our attachments to that I, me, mine, and moving into thy, thine, thee, thou, right? The word rashi loosely means sign. It literally means heap. Heap of stars is what it relates to. And if you think about it, if you think about a house, think about the color of the house. That's what the sign is. It indicates the sign or color of a house. And again, to correlate with the 12 houses, we also have the 12 signs. Then the next word here is graha. And we have the navagrahas, which is the 9 planets. And the word planet, again, is a very poor translation of the word graha. Graha comes from the Sanskrit word grih, means to seize or grasp, to imprison, to put you under the influence, and so on. So the body that seizes you, that which seizes or grasps your psyche, is graha. And that correlates to the 9 planets. And of course, in the 9 planets, you have the 7 visible bodies of the planets, and I'll get into that in another slide here, and the 2 shadow planets, or the chaya grahas. Chaya means shadow, and the 2 shadow planets are really that which eclipses through the shadow of ego. And I always laugh when I hear people talking about Rahu and Ketu in this very evil way. And the same thing about Saturn, right? I just think it's so funny, and it just demonstrates to me their complete lack of knowledge and understanding of what the planets literally mean, when all these planets are representations of you and your psyche. So how can you say something is bad when it's already been determined and destined that this is how you are going to express your life in this lifetime? So it also teaches us lessons of criticism and judgment and acceptance of others, but mostly about yourself, right? Because self-acceptance is the only way where we can learn to accept others. There's also the concept of the 11 upagrahas, which are the other subtler planets, right? And we're not going to bring too much of it into this. These are mathematical points, right? And we can think about these as inferior thoughts that can eclipse our mind. Again, I hope you guys are starting to see the correlation between the so-called planets and to the tendencies and parts of your psyche that we've all shut down or repressed or suppressed in parts of ourself, right? And that's what the grahas really mean, right? So the role of the graha as we can look at it as an internal archetype, and an archetype is simply a symbol that the mind uses, and many of you may already know some of the archetypes that are out there. You can certainly Google it and see all these amazing archetypes that are out there, and I encourage you to engage in the study of that as well. And because the concepts in Jyotish are so profound and so abstract, I completely encourage you to read these mythological stories, right? Or as they're referred to as myths and legends. But please do start to read some of the Puranas, and some of them are so funny and humorous, and some of them are just outright crazy, and you wonder, is this even possible? But when you read these stories, what you have to understand is these are sort of very dramatic depictions of what the human psyche is capable of, right? So please do read them. Please read the Puranas, the Srimad Bhagavatam, if you have not started to read them, the stories of Krishna and the battles that he had to fight. Even Lord Krishna was under the effects of many, many planets, and his was one of the most afflicted charts. When you look at his chart, it's just simply amazing. And if that's not a lesson for us to come into life and transcend our egos and our limited understanding and to kind of aim for our higher self, I don't know what is. Another one of my favorites is The Greatness of Saturn by Dr. Robert Swoboda, or Raviji as I call him. He was one of my first mentors from over 25, 27 years ago into Ayurveda and Jyotish. And then by all means, please read the story of the churning of the ocean, and that's easily available on Google. And The Greatness of Saturn, by the way, is a treatise on the planet Saturn, but it contains these beautiful, amazing stories of all the planets. And it has been my lifetime achievement to have this book translated into other languages in India, and my husband and I recently completed translating it into Malayalam, actually, so that the readers in Kerala are now able to read that work. And our next goal is to hopefully hit Tamil, to hit the Tamil-speaking population, and that's been my sadhana of sorts for the last 4 or 5 years, actually. Some more of the terminology. Janma Rashi, again, Rashi, which means heap. Janma means birth, and so Janma Rashi literally refers to the birth sign, the sign in which the moon was rising at the time of birth. So remember, in Jyotish, I think in Western astrology, and I know some of Western astrology because I've had to study it, but in Western astrology, they assume that you're standing straight up. But in Vedic astrology, we assume that the person is laying straight down, and we look at the eastern horizon for the rising signs and the rising planets to determine a person's ascendant or lagna, as we refer to it, and what their moon sign is. And remember, the moon is important because it is the mind and the filter through which we are experiencing life, right? Our reality. It's the first moment that our mind makes contact with the earthly plane. So when you go to a Vedic astrologer, we always look at the transits of the planets from the perspective of where your moon is at any given time, because that's how you are experiencing your reality and your life, from the perspective of your mind. So that's what we use in day-to-day calculations and analysis. Lagna is the other word for ascendant or rising sign. It's your first house or first bhava. It's the first moment that your soul rises to make contact with the earthly plane. It is that segment of the zodiac through which you've decided to come and make contact with the earthly plane. It is also sometimes referred to as the Udaya Lagna. Udaya means rising. Lagna again means the sign. At the eastern horizon when you were born, it's the very first house that your head was pointing in. And so that actually shows your personality, who you are in the world. Then we also have the concept of nakshatras. Nakshatra means asterism, and sometimes it's loosely translated as star. It's the constellations of those fixed stars in the sky that I referred to earlier, how the moon traverses through them. So the moon goes through these constellations, these nakshatras, every day. So each day the moon goes through each of these constellations, and there's 27 of them, and I'll get into it very briefly in a future lecture because it's literally outside the scope of this class. It gets very, very complicated. So that your nakshatra, and each of you have a unique nakshatra that you were born into at the time of your birth, and that defines a lot of the characteristics of your personality. So for example, my nakshatra is Dhanishta. So I know some of your nakshatras, but I won't share it. But please read up on it again. These are available on Google and Wikipedia, and I'll share some of it. So each nakshatra literally takes up residence in a sign. The other word I'd like for you to get familiar with is drishti. Drishti, comes from the Sanskrit word drish, which is to gaze or to look. It refers to the aspect of a graha, and you may have heard of this word aspect, and what does that mean? It's how a planet is looking at another planet or looking at another house, and it kind of tells you the influence that we are in. Under whose influence are we in? Who is looking at who and where is the question, right? And then some of the other terms are naturally benefic, right? What does that mean? Well, benefic word suggests gentle, nice. Saumya is the word. Saumya graha is how we refer to it in Jyotish. The natural tendencies of planets like Jupiter and Venus and the moon are considered natural benefics, right? They're soft, they're juicy, they are full of wisdom, they're teachers. And naturally malefic or cruel planets, the word is krura graha, are the sun, Mars, and Saturn, for example. The sun burns. Mars is aggressive. Saturn is the disciplinarian with a big stick, right? We also look at the relationships to and from the planets. So to depict relationships, we say a planet is either inimical to another or friendly to another. And the word for inimical is shatru or mitra, which is friendly. We also have neutral relationships. And one of the neutral planets, and the only neutral planet, is actually Mercury. And we actually, I don't know about North Indian Jyotish, but we actually use Mercury to depict Lord Krishna as well. All right, so let's talk about the 5 elements. And here's a shloka from the Brihad Parashara Hora Shastra. It refers to the 5 elements: Agni, Bhumi, Nabhasto, Ya, Vayavaha, Kramato, Dvija, Bhauma, Dinam, Grahanam, Cha, Tatva, Niti, Yatha, Kramam. It means the fire, earth, ether, water, and air in that order are from Mars, and all the other grahas are in their order as tattvas, as are the tattvas. So Mars can be seen as fire, Mercury can be seen as earth, Jupiter represents or is representing ether, Venus is water, and Saturn is air. And this is pretty important for us as practitioners and proponents of Ayurveda to understand this, because this is what comes into being as we look at our patients and our clients to assess which planet is predominant in a person. So getting into grahas a little bit more into detail, that which seizes you, that which grasps you and puts you under the influence. Surya, and this is a very long list, and I'm sorry, this is a very busy looking slide, right? And all of these are simply meant to give you frames of references, because you have an assignment coming at the end of this class that will perhaps allow you to explore these words within yourself. So Surya, or sun, represents the soul, the Atma. It refers to self, the supreme self actually, the journey of the soul in this lifetime, self-realization, influence, royalty, right? You can see that the sun also represents father. And in Ayurveda, we also refer to the sun as Aushadapati, means he is the father and lord of all Aushada, of all herbs and medicine. And so when we start to make herbs and we start to take medicines or prescribe medicines, or even start to look at disease and when to begin treatment, We also determine the efficacy. Is that treatment going to be efficacious for that patient or for that client by looking at the placement of the sun? And if the sun is not placed well in somebody's house at the moment of asking, and I mean this from a predictive astrology, not from a natal, not from your birth chart, so to speak, but at the moment of asking, if that sun is not disposited properly, then that treatment is not going to take effect very well. And even that is written, right? Because maybe it is through that disease that a patient has to go through to evolve and transcend to another version of themselves, right? And we know of many stories because it's only through suffering that we can actually get to an improved and better version of ourselves, because many of you have gone through personal trials, many of you have gone through challenges, and you've converted them into opportunities. It is what has brought you to Ayurveda. It is what has brought you to this moment in time to listen to my words, right? And all my trials and challenges in life have put me in this position to put me right here in front of you to speak this truth and this wisdom. So, consider this as a sacred moment, and know that it is only your difficulties and those challenges that have allowed you to rise to the best version of who you are that have put you in this position. Chandra, or the moon, the subconscious, it is our understanding of life. It is our emotions. It is what represents facial beauty. It is when we look at someone and they have a very beautiful face, like full of shining, we know that their moon is exalted. It represents mother. It represents watery fat. So for those of us who see a lot of cellulite on us, that is ruled by the moon. That's an afflicted moon. Lymph issues, edema, all of this is ruled by the moon. Anything to do with kidney issues, ruled again by the moon, right? It also shows affluence. Anything to do with water refers to the moon. The next planet is Kuja, or Mangal. And again, I'd like for you to start getting familiar with the Sanskrit names of the grahas rather than just referring to them as a sun, moon, Mars, Mercury, etc., because in the word is a meaning that transcends just the name that is given. So, for example, Surya, Su is auspicious. So understand what that means. Chandra, Kuja, Mangal, all of these words have different meanings. So please explore for yourselves what this word means. What each of the words mean. So Kuja or Mangal, Mars, represents stamina, courage, desire, anger, aggression. He's sort of the general that allows the army to march through the battle, right? He's the commander of the army. He represents property and land, immovable property. Represents also your younger brother, relations, cousins. And above all, he's a very pitta planet, like Surya is, and represents inflammation. He absolutely, I can look at a person's chart and instantly tell, oh, okay, here's what's going on, depending on what houses is the position of Mars, how that person's health is going to be. Of course, that's not the only planet we look at, right? Because not everybody just has inflammation. Many people have mental afflictions, depression, all of those. Moon actually affects a person's mind. It represents the mind. So the moon can also indicate mental instability, psychic disturbances, mental illnesses, all of those things as well. And not just the moon alone. There are other planets that represent that as well. Buddha, Mercury, represents intellect, intelligence, the idea of discernment, to separate pure from the impure, discrimination, speech, expression, mathematics, logic. And people with exalted Mercuries actually lean towards astrology, mathematical sciences, and computer sciences. And that's like, I've seen that Mercury is very exalted for me to a certain degree, and I didn't know that, and with all my interests that I had, until someone else actually showed it to me. So that was what launched me into the study of Jyotish, actually. People with exalted Mercury actually gets into the medical knowledge and profession, writing, publishing, acting, even in theater. And I've listed here as acting as a middleman in trade or politics, because they're the diplomat, they're the ambassadors, right? They're the king's messenger. So if the sun is the king and the moon is the queen, Mercury has the sun's ear. He is the one who speaks the truth of the soul, right? And if Mercury is debilitated, as you can see, all the opposites of these things can come about as well. Mercury also represents a maternal uncle, right? And in Lord Krishna's chart, it actually says, many of you know that, when Lord Krishna was born, he actually killed his maternal uncle. And even that was in his chart, right? And so Mercury is always within 30 degrees of the sun, right? Because Mercury is the closest planet of the sun. And in your chart, depending at the moment of your birth, if it is within 13 degrees, or sorry, I think it's 10, I have to go back and look, but the sun being such a fiery planet, it burns everything up that it comes in contact with. So we can also look at a person's chart, and if that Mercury is too near the sun, it can actually burn up and burn up all the positive qualities of Mercury. So while a person can be intelligent, that intelligence does not transmute into discrimination and good discernment. So that state is called combust. That means that the planet has just been burnt up by the sun. And combust is important because it actually tells you the ability of that planet to evolve into its higher qualities. And if it is way too close to the sun, it has burnt up all of the positive qualities. So it actually magnifies and amplifies a person's weaknesses, so to speak. And, I don't put too much emphasis on the combust piece. It just shows me what the person's weaknesses are, or where there's, and I don't even like to use the word weakness, right? Because every weakness and every challenge is an opportunity, is how I see it. It's that place in your life where you can rise up to be present and go, do I take this road? Do I take this road? Should I just get angry and yell at someone, or should I just know that this is what's happening to me and move forward? So again, this is not about what the planets are doing to this. This is about your personal responsibility and you developing self-awareness, right? So moving on to Guru. We know this word as one of the qualities or the gunas that we study. Guru means heavy. This represents Jupiter, the teacher to the devas or the gods. Brihaspati is another word for Jupiter. He represents wisdom, learning, corpulence, acts of religious merit, devotion to God, ancestors, holy places, scriptures, proficiency in learning, philosophical, and trees that give fruit actually are represented by Guru. And he rules the liver, and he also rules the sound from the vocal cords. So that's why we say Guru is also the preceptor for mantras. So while Mercury rules speech, Guru rules the sound coming out of your vocal cords. Shukra, or Venus, the shining seed, it represents the spouse. Now, Shukra is also the acharya to the demons, actually. So he has equal standing with Guru, but in a different way. So it's really interesting. Again, please go back and read the stories of the Puranas, and this will make more sense to you. Shukra also refers to semen, so he rules the reproductive organs, grains and seeds, right? Anything that we can plant and gives rise to a fruit tree or grain, whatever. It also refers to the clarity of the eye, the lens of the eye. And Shani, or Shaneshwara, the slowest moving planet, represents Saturn. He has many names, one of which is Krishna. Manda Pangu Kala, Kala representing time, longevity, death, adversity, calamities, poverty, being in servitude, lame, crippled, slow, self-restraint, separation from father, cruel deeds. And you can see from the words that represent Saturn, he's all about teaching you, separating you from your illusion and delusion. And so you'll get this when you read The Greatness of Saturn, if many of you, if you choose to read it. It tells you about how the journey of our lives is really about being in reality with a presence of mind and a commitment to truth. And that's what Saturn teaches us. And so again, I hear people just off the cuff saying, oh, Shani, he's evil. And in India particularly, you'll see people running off to astrologers. Oh, I'm in my Sade Saat. I'm in my 7.5 period of Saturn. Please give me this ring to wear, or please do this puja for me. And that's all great, you know. Jyotish actually talks about remedial measures, but none of it includes other people doing things for you or you being wearing big gemstones. I don't believe in that. It's all about you taking personal responsibility. So to pay some pujari or some priest to do something for you it takes away your personal responsibility, and Saturn's going to absolutely make sure that you have learned your lessons in this lifetime about reality. So you can see I feel very strongly about Saturn. He's actually very exalted for me in my chart in the house of spirituality. The other two planets are Rahu and Ketu, the shadow planets. The northern node of Rahu, which is, so if you think about Rahu and Ketu, so when the moon, as you know, orbits around the Earth, and at the northern point, when the moon's ecliptic intersects with the sun's ecliptic, that is a mathematical point that we refer to as Rahu. So these are subtle bodies, if you will. They have an influence on us when the moon kind of crosses that ecliptic and intersects with the ecliptic of the sun. Similarly, Ketu is the southern intersection point when the ecliptic of the moon intersects with the ecliptic of the sun. Rahu is the serpent's head without the body. Again, please read the story of the churning of the ocean. You will see how Rahu and Ketu came about from a mythological standpoint. Rahu represents paternal grandfather, arguments, harsh speech, addictions, gambling, traveling from where you were born, foreigners, snake. He's sometimes referred to as Sarpa or Ananta. And in many cases, he represents Adishesha, the 1,000-headed serpent above Lord Vishnu, as Lord Vishnu is lying on his side on the ocean of bliss, right? Beautiful, beautiful stories that show you what these archetypes represent. Intrigue, I love this word, intrigue with widower. Eczema, any kind of skin diseases, itches are all ruled by Rahu. Any sharp pains, hiccups, and swelling in the body is also represented by Rahu. And in contrast, Ketu is the body without the head. So somebody with Ketu is, let's say, perhaps in their ascendant. Now, Ketu is a spiritual planet. He takes away. He doesn't care about any of the sensory enjoyment. So literally, you could eat the best caviar or have the best champagne in the world and still be left feeling very disenchanted and feeling very disillusioned about your life, right? Because this Ketu represents your spiritual journey to severing attachments from your illusions. He represents moksha. He also represents the occult, enemies, horned animals, the dog, birds with different spots and colors, philosophy, your maternal grandfather, all represented by Ketu. All right, so this visual, this graphic, it shows you how Lord Vishnu is represented as a Kala Purusha. And he is the absolute supreme self personified in this way, right? Again, the image is a very limited concept of us, our limited minds trying to grasp this supreme concept of self, right? Of of the cosmos, right? So he is the invisible, the time personified, and that's why we refer to him as a Kala Purusha. And the limbs of time are the 12 Rashis as the planets traverse through the Rashis. And you can see in this graphic, you know, each of the houses or the signs are represented as segments of Lord Vishnu. And they all represent, so, you know, the house 1, Aries represents the head, Taurus represents face and neck, Mithuna represents the shoulders and arms, Karkataka, which is Cancer, represents the chest and the heart, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to go through the whole list. You guys can look at the graphic here, and I made this little table to translate the Sanskrit words for the signs into English as well, so you can, and the rulers that are associated with them, the rulers of those signs, so you have a better understanding. And remember, we'll get into this in more detail in future lessons, but the sun and the moon own one sign each. The sun rules Leo, moon has Cancer. Every other planet has 2 houses each. And so you can start to see the Mercury being the closest to the sun, then has Gemini and Virgo. Venus owns Taurus and Libra. Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. Jupiter owns Sagittarius and Pisces. And Saturn owns Capricorn and Aquarius. Okay, and then getting into the styles of the Jyotish chart, and I realize that we're at the end of our hour. And Monica G, what do you think? Should we continue in the next class? I want to be mindful of time because I have a few more slides, I believe, to go through. I'll try to hit this, and then what I'd like for you guys to do, okay, we'll hit this in the next lecture. So sorry about that. I did go over getting into the philosophy. But what I'd like for you to do, we'll begin with this, go into some future things. I don't have too much more, but what I'd like to finish off with maybe here is to understand that Jyotish is really about an exercise of knowing yourself, right? Your chart is a painting of life that is like broad brushstrokes. It's a metaphor. If you take a wide-angle lens and kind of finish, you know, take a picture of a panorama of your life in front of you, that's what it is, right? And whether or not you get to exercise your free will and evaluate the choices that you have in every moment, that's up to you. That's where your free will comes in. And so in the business world, we talk about doing a SWOT analysis. I don't know how many of you are in the corporate world, but this is great. This is where we get to look at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? And that's one way of looking at your chart. What are your challenges? What are your opportunities? Know your weaknesses, because you are as strong as knowing what your weaknesses are, right? And so again, accept and understand, and please acknowledge the fact that all of you are here because all of you have grace, and that Jyotish is a very personal journey into self-awareness, right? And I'll get into the next few lectures. Again, I apologize for going over time. What I'd like for you guys to do, if you don't mind, before we meet for next class, is the assignment, a self-informing exercise. Please, how would you explain and define Jyotish? What is Vedic astrology? If you were speaking to your friends or your family, how would you explain it? And then explore the mental and physical characteristics of one planet and how it may have seized you. And really sit with it and see what is it that you choose to see and what is it that you don't choose to see. And hopefully each of you will pick any number of the 9 planets. Hopefully you're not just all picking the same planet, because even that shows a tendency, because some of us are not willing to look at ourselves in a very real way, and that's not a judgment, right? It is what it is, so please look at that. And I've listed some reading recommendations. Please share on the forum under Jyotish. Just share what your experiences are, and then based on slide 6 where I've listed that sidereal column, explore what your sun Rashi is. So where is your sun? That should tell you where your sun is in your sign. And let me just go to that so you guys, oops, there, I just passed it. So on this, depending on when your birthday is, in the sidereal column, that will tell you which sign, which constellation that the sun was in when you were born. And so explore that. What does that mean for the sun to be in that sign, right, for yourself? All right. Thank you, and again, I apologize that we've gone over time. I hope to pick up and cover more about the styles of Jyotish and get more into the grahas and the bhavas. I hope that this was somewhat useful to you, or if it has shed any insight, and I hope I didn't go over into too much deep philosophical concepts. I hope it is that you're interested in this science. Thank you, and namaste.